We often call it a coincidence, a recurring argument with a partner, a specific type of frustration at every job, even a string of strange, identical delays. You move on, yet the situation finds you again. It feels like a glitch in the script of your life. Have you ever noticed these loops? You change the scenery, but the play remains the same. Most people believe they are simply unlucky. They treat these repetitions as obstacles to be avoided. But what if the repetition isn't an accident? There is a subtle mechanism operating beneath the surface of your daily experience. It is a persistent signal designed to be felt. The pattern doesn't stop because you've moved. It stops because you've looked. You are standing in a feedback loop that only has one exit. You might have seen this in your own life. Perhaps it's a specific type of person who always seems to cross your path, triggering the same old defensive reaction. Or maybe it's a recurring financial hurdle that appears every time you feel you finally gain some ground. We often try to outrun these moments. We change our routines, our jobs, or our social circles, hoping the cycle will break. Yet the same tension returns under a different name. Something strange happens in moments like these. It's as if the world is insisting on a specific conversation that you aren't quite ready to have. This pattern appears more often than we realize, hiding in the mundane frustrations of our Tuesday afternoons.
Most of us have overlooked a vital detail. These repetitions aren't trying to stop us. They are trying to tell us something about the frequency we are currently broadcasting. Why do these specific scenes keep playing out, regardless of the actors involved? Understanding this mechanism changes everything. By the end of this exploration, you may begin seeing these signals everywhere. This is where the pattern becomes clear. We often move through our days believing that life is a series of disconnected events. We categorize a productive week as good luck and a month of setbacks as a rough patch. But if you look closer, the repetition suggests something deeper. Have you ever noticed how a specific type of conflict follows you from one job to the next, even when the people are entirely different? Or how a sudden, intuitive decision to take a different route leads to a chance encounter that changes your entire year? These moments are not isolated. There is a strange consistency many people notice when they stop looking at the details and start looking at the structure. One week, the world seems to yield to your every move. Opportunities arrive before you even ask. The next week, every door feels locked, and the simplest tasks meet invisible resistance. We usually misinterpret this as the natural ebb and flow of fortune.
We call it having a bad day or being on a roll. Yet the pattern becomes difficult to ignore when you realize that these shifts often mirror a specific internal shift you've just made. The repetition isn't random. It is a persistent echo. This is where the experience begins to make sense. We have been taught to view these repeating patterns as problems to be solved or obstacles to be overcome, but this reveals something important about how reality works. The repetition isn't a wall, it is a resonance. Think of your internal state, your beliefs, your definitions, and your persistent moods as a specific frequency. Reality does not have a mind of its own. It is a mirror that can only reflect the image you present to it. When a situation repeats, it is because the internal frequency that created it remains unchanged. The teaching is simpler than most people expect. You are not experiencing a world, you are experiencing your own alignment. This changes the way we see the experience of being stuck. Suddenly, the pattern becomes easier to understand when you realize that life isn't happening to you, it is responding to you. These repeating scenes are the universe's way of showing you exactly where you are standing. It is a persistent invitation to shift your perspective. If the reflection hasn't changed, it simply means you haven't moved. This mechanism has been operating in your life since the moment you were born, quietly guiding every encounter and every delay.
To understand why the pattern repeats, you have to look at how a radio functions. You cannot hear a specific broadcast unless you are tuned to its exact frequency. Reality works the same way. Your internal state, your core beliefs, and the emotions you settle into is the tuner. When you hold a specific frequency, you can only perceive the broadcasts that match it. This explains why the pattern behaves this way. If you are tuned to a frequency of lack or defensive struggle, you will naturally intersect with people and situations that validate that state. It is not that other realities don't exist. It is simply that you aren't tuned to them yet. Think of it like a film reel. Each moment is a static frame. When you change your internal alignment, you aren't fixing the old frame. You are shifting to an entirely different reel where the old pattern doesn't even exist. Why does the flow disappear the moment we ignore our excitement? Because excitement is the physical resonance of being on the right frequency. When you ignore it, you are effectively turning the dial away from the station you actually want to hear. Suddenly, the shift begins to make sense. You aren't stuck in a world that won't change. You are just repeating a frequency that the mirror is required to reflect. The logic of the mirror is simple. If we change the frequency, the reflection must follow. But if the mechanism is so straightforward, why do we find ourselves back in the same exhausting loops?
This is where many of us lose the signal. The moment a new possibility appears, a spark of excitement or a sudden intuitive pull, the inner voice begins to argue. We have been conditioned to mistake this resistance for wisdom. We call it being realistic or responsible. We interpret our fear as logic and our hesitation as maturity. How many times has caution silenced the signal of excitement in your own life? This is the moment the internal dialogue shifts from what is possible to what is safe. We cling to the repeating pattern because even if it is painful, it is familiar. We fear that if we follow the excitement without a guaranteed outcome, we will fall into a void. But the mechanism shows us the opposite. By choosing the safe path that lacks resonance, we are manually tuning our radio back to the very station we wanted to leave. Suddenly, the excitement is replaced by doubt, and the heavy friction of the old reality returns. Have you ever noticed yourself doing this? If you've felt that signal and talked yourself out of it, I'm curious to hear about that moment in the comments. Despite the weight of old habits, there is a simple method to begin shifting your alignment. It is a way of navigating your experience based on the signal of resonance rather than the logic of lack. The formula is precise. First, identify the option available to you in this moment that contains the most excitement, even if it is a small, mundane task.
Second, act on that excitement to the best of your ability, using every resource you have. Third, and most importantly, release all attachment to what the outcome should look like. This is where the navigation begins. By acting on the signal without insisting on a specific result, you are manually shifting your frequency. You are no longer the person who repeats the old pattern. This is how the signal becomes action and how the shift in your timeline actually starts. The process works best when followed with light-hearted curiosity rather than the pressure to force a change. What small excitement have you been ignoring recently? If this idea helped you see your choices differently, leave a like so more people can discover this mechanism. The change rarely starts with something dramatic. It usually hides in a quiet impulse during a Tuesday afternoon. Imagine you're at your desk, buried in a repetitive task that feels like a heavy weight. Suddenly, a small curiosity surfaces, a specific book you haven't thought about in years, or a person you've been meaning to contact. Most people dismiss this as a random distraction. But in this scenario, you decide to follow the signal. You send that brief message or spend 10 minutes looking up that topic. That one small action shifts your alignment. An hour later, that person calls you back with an opportunity that perfectly solves the problem you were struggling with at your desk. Or that book contains the exact phrase you needed to hear to break a long-standing creative block. This is often how the shift begins. You didn't move a mountain. You simply tuned the radio to a different frequency through a single, small decision. How many times has a small decision changed the entire direction of your day? You may have already experienced similar moments and dismissed them as mere luck. But when you look closer, you see the mechanism at work. The signal appeared, you acted without demanding a specific result, and the mirror of reality reflected a new path. Suddenly, the pattern reveals a deeper meaning. We have spent this journey looking at how repetition functions as a mirror, but this suggests something remarkable about the nature of reality itself. If the reflection only changes when we change our alignment, then we are not actually creating a new life through effort. Instead, we are navigating through a field of infinite, pre-existing versions of ourselves. This changes the way we understand the experience of time and choice. It implies that the reality you seek, the version of your life where the repeating loop has already vanished, is not a future destination you must build. It is a frequency that already exists in this very moment.
Could these small signals of excitement be guiding us toward versions of ourselves we have not yet explored? This perspective transforms your daily life from a struggle for survival into a conscious process of selection.
You are not a victim of a persistent world. You are an explorer choosing which frame of reality to illuminate next. You may already be standing at the threshold of this realization in your own life, noticing that the old patterns no longer have the same grip on your attention. The mirror hasn't changed because the world got better. It changed because you finally looked away from the loop and toward the signal. Perhaps the signal has been there all along, hiding in the gaps between your busy thoughts. The pattern of your life is not a cage, but a conversation that is constantly updating. Sometimes the shift begins simply by noticing that you are the one holding the remote. As you move through your day, you may begin to see these repetitions not as obstacles, but as precise maps showing you exactly where your frequency is set. The subtle impulses you once dismissed may start to feel a little clearer, and the heavy friction of the old loops may finally begin to fade. How often have these moments appeared quietly in your life, waiting for you to recognize them? As your awareness shifts, the mirror of your reality has no choice but to follow. The journey into how these internal signals shape your physical experience goes even deeper. The exploration appearing on your screen now reveals what happens when you consistently follow this resonance into the unknown.